Arthur Vance, his impeccably tailored suit, a stark contrast to the grime of Elm Street, stood beside his gleaming black limousine, a vehicle that whispered wealth with every polished curve. He was a man accustomed to acquiring, to possessing, to bending the world to his will. His gaze, sharp and assessing, often overlooked the mundane, fixing instead on targets of greater value. Yet, on this particular morning, his attention was momentarily snared by an unusual possession: a wolf. It was a creature of stark, unsettling beauty, though its present state spoke of neglect. Its ribs were sharply defined beneath a coat of matted grayish fur, and its eyes, a deep, unsettling amber, held a distant, weary intelligence that seemed out of place amidst the urban cacophony. A leash, so thin it was almost invisible, tethered it loosely to Arthur's wrist, a token of ownership rather than a true restraint. Arthur had purchased the animal weeks prior from some exotic animal dealer, envisioning a conversation piece, a symbol of untamed power displayed in his penthouse, a fleeting indulgence. But the wolf, as he had quickly discovered, was not a pet. Its wildness was not a facade to be admired. It was an unyielding core, a constant, inconvenient reminder of a world he could not command. The creature's restless pacing, its unnerving silence, its refusal to be domesticated, had transformed it from a status symbol into a tiresome nuisance. Arthur, growing impatient with its presence, and perhaps feeling a sudden, inexplicable urge to divest himself of this particular problem with a flourish, turned his attention to Elias. Elias, hunched against the cold brick, watched the exchange with a quiet, almost imperceptible curiosity. His face, a roadmap of deep lines and sun-weathered skin, bore the marks of 62 years spent largely at the fringes, observing, surviving. He had seen countless transactions on these streets, but never one quite like this. Arthur, with a dismissive wave of his manicured hand, gestured towards the wolf. "$1, old man," he announced, his voice carrying an edge of bored authority. "And it's yours." The offer hung in the crisp morning air, an absurdity, a challenge. Arthur considered it a gesture both eccentric and, in his own distorted view, philanthropic. It was a sardonic test, a means to rid himself of a troublesome animal while simultaneously indulging a fleeting sense of superiority, of being able to bestow a living creature for the price of a cup of coffee. He fully expected a bewildered refusal, perhaps a stammered excuse about the impracticality of such a gift. Yet Elias, though undeniably bewildered, saw more than just $1. He saw the wolf's hollow eyes, its gaunt frame, the shivering tremor that ran through its powerful yet diminished body. He saw a reflection of something wild and forgotten within himself, a creature on the brink, much like many he encountered daily, perhaps even much like himself. $1 to Arthur was meaningless. To Elias, it represented a profound choice, a responsibility. With a slow, deliberate nod, he extended a calloused hand, accepting the single dollar coin and with it the shivering, magnificent beast. The weight of that dollar, warm in his palm, felt heavier than any coin Arthur had ever held. Elias named the wolf Shadow. The first few days of their unexpected companionship were a silent struggle, a dance of tentative steps and wary glances. Shadow, still steeped in the fear and distrust instilled by its previous captivity and neglect, kept its distance, a phantom moving just beyond Elias's reach. Its amber eyes, though no longer holding the same weary resignation, remained sharp, constantly assessing, never fully at ease. Elias, despite his own meager resources, a few coins gleaned from the day, scraps of food found or given, shared every morsel, every drop of water. He spoke to the wolf in low, soothing tones, words of kinship and quiet understanding that carried no expectation, no demand. He did not try to command, only to offer. He understood that a wild heart could not be broken into submission. It had to be won, slowly, patiently. He recalled the stories his grandfather, a man of the woods, used to tell about the language of the wild, spoken not with words, but with presence, with respect. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, a fragile bridge began to form between the man and the beast. It was built not on dominance or ownership, but on mutual vulnerability, on the raw, primal instinct for survival, and on an unspoken recognition of shared hardship. It was a pact forged in the quiet corners of the city, away from the judging eyes of the wealthy, a bond far more intricate and enduring than Arthur Vance could ever comprehend. Some bonds, as a wise old woodsman once told Elias, are woven from threads stronger than any chain, threads of trust spun in the loom of shared silence. The cold, stark reality of their new existence settled around Elias and Shadow like a heavy cloak. The initial wariness in the wolf's amber eyes was a constant reminder of its wildness. A barrier Elias knew he could not simply break. He understood that trust, especially with a creature so deeply attuned to instinct and survival, was not given. It was earned, painstakingly, piece by piece. Their first nights were spent in abandoned warehouses or under the sparse cover of overgrown city parks. Elias huddled against the biting wind, Shadow a vigilant, silent presence a few feet away, always facing outwards, its ears twitching at every distant siren, every rustle of leaves. Elias would offer what little food he had, half a stale bagel, a discarded piece of chicken, placing it gently on the ground and retreating, allowing Shadow to approach on its own terms. He never forced proximity, never reached out a hand without first speaking in soft, reassuring tones, observing the subtle shifts in the wolf's posture, the flicker of its ears. Days bled into weeks, each one a testament to Elias's unwavering patience. He spoke to Shadow not as one would speak to a pet, but as one would speak to an equal, a fellow survivor. He told it about the city, about the river, about the quiet moments he remembered from a lifelong past. He didn't expect understanding, only presence. Slowly, tentatively, the distance between them began to shrink. Shadow would sometimes follow a little closer, its gaze lingering on Elias with something akin to curiosity. One evening, as a sudden sharp rain lashed down, Elias found a small sheltered alcove. He sat, wrapped in his threadbare coat, and Shadow, after a long moment of internal debate, chose to lie down not at a safe distance, but just within the circle of Elias's warmth, its body a silent primal anchor against the cold. It was a small gesture, but to Elias it was a chasm crossed, a fragile bridge holding firm. He felt the tremor of the wolf's breath, the steady beat of its wild heart, and a profound sense of purpose, long absent from his solitary life, began to stir within him. Under Elias's quiet, unwavering care, Shadow began a slow, profound transformation. The change was not just physical, though that was dramatic enough. The matted, dull fur, once a uniform grey, started to regain its depth, revealing subtle shifts of charcoal and silver, especially along its spine and the powerful muscles of its shoulders. The hollows beneath its eyes filled, and the amber gaze, once clouded with fear and exhaustion, sharpened, becoming piercing, intelligent, and fiercely alert. Its ribs, once stark and prominent, softened as muscle and healthy fat began to build. The tremor that had once run through its frame vanished, replaced by a fluid, almost liquid grace in its movements. Shadow no longer shuffled or slunk. It moved with the effortless power of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment, even if that environment was currently a concrete jungle. Yet it never became a dog. This was crucial. Its wildness remained, a fierce primal core that defined its every instinct. It did not bark, but communicated through a rich vocabulary of low growls, soft whines, and subtle body language. It did not seek affection in the way a dog might, but its loyalty to Elias was absolute, expressed through its constant, watchful presence, its readiness to stand between Elias and any perceived threat. It moved like a phantom, a silent guardian, its presence a stark contrast to the relentless rhythm of the city. People on the streets, accustomed to the mundane, would often pause, their conversations dying in their throats as Elias and Shadow passed. There was a primal awe in their gazes, a mixture of fear and fascination. Whispers followed them, tales of the old man and his wolf, a living legend in the city's underbelly. Children would point, wide-eyed, while adults would pull their own pets closer, a nervous respect in their eyes. Elias, once invisible, now walked with an undeniable aura, the wild spirit beside him reflecting a strength he had always possessed, but rarely displayed. He would often find small offerings left for them, a piece of bread, a half-eaten sandwich, left by strangers who saw not a beggar and a dangerous beast, but a man and his extraordinary companion. Weeks later, the city was still the same, yet for Arthur Vance, it was subtly, irrevocably altered. He was in his penthouse office, the panoramic windows offering a dizzying view of the metropolis, a kingdom he believed he commanded. He was on a conference call discussing mergers and acquisitions, his voice a calm, authoritative drone, when his gaze, idly drifting, caught a flicker of movement in the distant park, a patch of green amidst the grey. He paused, his train of thought momentarily derailed. A man stooped but with an unexpected dignity, walked slowly, and beside him, moving with an almost liquid grace, was a creature that made Arthur's breath catch. It was unmistakably his wolf, the one he had so casually discarded, yet it was transformed. No longer the emaciated, fearful animal, this was a magnificent beast, its fur gleaming, its muscles rippling beneath its coat. Its head was held high, its amber eyes scanning the surroundings with an alertness that spoke of confidence, not fear. And its proximity to the old man, Elias, was startling. Not tethered, not coerced, but a chosen companionship, a silent, powerful bond. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, went through Arthur. It wasn't just the wolf, it was the implication. He, Arthur Vance, a man who could buy and sell entire corporations, who commanded respect and fear, had been utterly unable to tame this creature. He had seen it as a problem, a failed acquisition, a wild thing that refused to conform to his gilded cage. Yet this beggar, this nobody, had somehow, with nothing but kindness and shared hardship, unlocked its true essence. A seed of envy, sharp and bitter, took root in Arthur's heart. It festered, growing with each passing day. He had given away a mere animal, an inconvenient pet, but Elias had, in his quiet, unassuming way, cultivated something far more profound. Loyalty, respect, an untamed spirit thriving in an impossible environment. It was a mirror reflecting Arthur's own profound emptiness, his inability to form genuine, unconditional connections. He saw the wolf not as a creature, but as a symbol of something he had lost. Something that had slipped through his fingers despite his boundless wealth. It gnawed at him, a constant irritating itch beneath his polished facade. He, Arthur Vance, was accustomed to having every desire fulfilled, every whim catered to. This wolf, now magnificent and loyal to another, became an object of obsessive desire, a challenge to his perceived omnipotence. He decided he wanted the wolf back. The thought was not a fleeting impulse, but a cold, calculated decision, born of wounded pride and a possessive need to reclaim what he felt was rightfully his. He dispatched one of his assistants, a young, eager man named Marcus, to locate the old man and his dog. Marcus, a city native, returned with wide eyes and a story of a wolf, not a dog, and an old man who seemed to command its silent respect. Arthur dismissed the awe in Marcus's voice. "Find them," he commanded, "and tell the old man I'm interested in buying it back. Offer him $1,000. The next day, Arthur, unable to trust the delicacy of his assistant, approached Elias himself in a quiet corner of the park, where the old man and Shadow often rested. Shadow, sensing the stranger's approach, shifted, its amber eyes fixing on Arthur with an unnerving intensity, a low, almost imperceptible growl rumbling deep in its chest. Elias, looking up from where he was sharing a crust of bread with the wolf, met Arthur's gaze with a calm, unblinking directness that Arthur found surprisingly unsettling. "Elias, isn't it?" Arthur began, his voice smooth, condescending. "Arthur Vance, we met before. I gave you that animal." He gestured vaguely at Shadow. "He's looking much better. I'm willing to buy him back. $1,000. That's a generous offer for a mutt like that." He tried to sound casual, but a tremor of impatience was already present. Elias looked from Arthur to Shadow, whose head was now resting trustingly on his knee, its gaze still fixed on the millionaire. He shook his head slowly. "He's not for sale, Mr. Vance." His voice was raspy but firm, imbued with a quiet dignity that surprised Arthur. Arthur's thin lips tightened. $1,000, old man. That could buy you a place to stay, some decent meals. Think about it." He pressed, his tone hardening. He couldn't comprehend the refusal. $1,000 for a stray animal. It was an unimaginable sum for someone like Elias. Elias simply shook his head again, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "He's not a mutt, Mr. Vance. And he's not property, he's Shadow. And he's not for sale." The finality in his voice was absolute. Arthur's frustration began to simmer, quickly escalating into a cold, determined obsession. He was not accustomed to being denied, especially by someone he considered so utterly beneath him. He returned the next day, and the next, his offers steadily climbing. 5,000, Elias. That's enough to change your life, he cajoled, a forced geniality in his voice. Elias merely stroked Shadow's head, the wolf's eyes meeting Arthur's with an unwavering challenge. $10,000, old man. Are you deaf? This is a fortune. Arthur's voice was now laced with open irritation, his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. 20,000. Take it or leave it. That's more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Each refusal fueled Arthur's determination, transforming his desire into a consuming need. He saw the wolf not just as an animal, but as a living, breathing symbol of something he had lost, something that had slipped through his fingers despite his boundless wealth and influence. It was an affront to his very identity, a gaping hole in his meticulously curated world. He felt a deep, gnawing sense of injustice, a primal outrage. How could a beggar, a man with nothing, possess what he, a millionaire, could not buy? It was a clash of worlds, a fundamental collision of values. Arthur measured worth in currency, in acquisition, in control. Elias measured it in loyalty, in spirit, in the unspoken language of shared existence. To Arthur, the wolf was a commodity, an asset whose value could be quantified and exchanged. To Elias, Shadow was more than a pet. It was a bond forged in adversity, a living testament to a different kind of wealth, one that transcended any monetary sum. It was a relationship, pure and unconditional, something Arthur had never truly experienced nor understood. His obsession began to bleed into his professional life, subtly at first. During a high-stakes board meeting, his mind would drift, picturing Elias and the wolf, a flicker of irritation crossing his face when he should have been impassive. He found himself distracted, his focus fractured, his decisions occasionally clouded by this persistent, infuriating problem. His associates noticed, though none dared to comment. Arthur Vance, the unshakable titan, seemed preoccupied. Driven by a possessive need that bordered on madness, Arthur resorted to less savory tactics. He couldn't buy the wolf, so he would take it. He hired men, not the polished corporate types, but hulking figures with cold eyes and an air of quiet menace. "Get me the wolf," he instructed, "and make sure the old man understands that this is for his own good." He rationalized it as a rescue, convincing himself that Elias was incapable of properly caring for such a magnificent creature, that the wolf belonged in a more appropriate setting, his own penthouse, of course. The hired men, two burly figures named Frank and Gus, began to follow Elias and Shadow. Their methods were unsubtle, designed to intimidate. They would appear suddenly in alleys, blocking Elias's path, their shadows falling over him. "Listen, old man," Frank would growl, his voice rough. "Mr. Vance is being very generous. Don't make this difficult." Gus would stand silently, his arms crossed, a silent threat. But Shadow, ever vigilant, was not easily intimidated. Its amber eyes would narrow, a low guttural growl rumbling deep in its chest, a sound that vibrated with primal power. It would position itself protectively in front of Elias, its teeth bared in a silent, terrifying snarl, its hackles raised, transforming it into a formidable, dangerous beast. On one occasion, as Frank lunged forward, intending to grab Elias, Shadow moved with astonishing speed, a blur of grey fur and snapping jaws, stopping just short of Frank's hand, its fangs inches from his flesh. The men, though tough, were not prepared for the raw, untamed ferocity of a wild wolf. They retreated, shaken, the primal force of the animal a stark contrast to their crude, brute strength. The wild spirit, once discarded, now stood as an unbreakable living barrier. The incidents escalated. Arthur's men tried to corner them in a deserted market to lure Shadow with meat laced with sedatives. But the wolf's instincts were too sharp, its bond with Elias too profound. Shadow would nudge Elias, subtly guiding him away from danger, its senses detecting threats long before Elias could. Elias, in turn, became more resourceful, more elusive. He learned to navigate the city's hidden pathways, its forgotten tunnels and overgrown shortcuts, moving like a ghost through the urban landscape. The city, once a labyrinth of despair, became a tactical map, a series of escape routes. But the constant threat, the relentless pursuit, took its toll. Elias was growing weary, and he knew that sooner or later Arthur Vance's resources would overwhelm them. He could not fight a millionaire indefinitely. Realizing the futility and the ever-present danger of staying in the city, Elias made a profound decision. He would not surrender Shadow, nor would he allow their bond to be broken by force. He would retreat. He would take Shadow where it truly belonged, where Arthur Vance's money and influence held no sway. They would venture into the quiet, expansive forests bordering the city, a landscape where the wolf's wildness was not an inconvenience but a necessity. It was a drastic step, a return to a life even more uncertain than his current one, but it was the only way to protect what they had. Their journey was arduous. They moved under the cover of night, avoiding roads and populated areas, guided by Shadow's unerring sense of direction. Elias, with his innate connection to nature, dusted off old skills he thought he'd long forgotten. Reading the stars, finding potable water, identifying edible plants. Shadow, in turn, became his guide, its keen senses leading them through dense undergrowth, its presence a constant reassurance in the unfamiliar wilderness. The transition from concrete to forest was a rebirth for both of them. The cacophony of the city was replaced by the rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of coyotes, a language Shadow understood intimately. Here, in the whispering pines and rugged terrain, their bond deepened further, forged in the crucible of shared survival. Elias found a new purpose, a profound connection to the natural world he had once known, a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in decades. Shadow, free from the confines of human civilization, found its true home, its movements becoming even more fluid, its spirit soaring. Its loyalty to the old man was absolute, a silent promise whispered on the wind. Back in the city, Arthur Vance, relentless in his pursuit, had finally achieved a hollow victory. His obsession had led him down a path of questionable ethics, alienating business partners who found his single-minded fixation on a wolf bizarre and unprofessional. Negative media attention, fueled by whispers of his animalistic attempts to reclaim the wolf, had begun to tarnish his carefully crafted public image. He had squandered considerable resources, paying off informants, hiring expensive lawyers, and maintaining his thuggish enforcers. His judgment, usually razor-sharp, was overshadowed by this irrational need. Eventually, through sheer force of will and legal maneuvering, he secured a court order for the wolf's return, citing ownership and animal welfare concerns. Arthur stood triumphant in his opulent office, holding the official document, a crisp piece of paper adorned with seals and signatures. He had won. He had proven that money and power could indeed conquer all. Yet as he looked out at the sprawling city, a vast empty expanse now, an agonizing emptiness settled in his heart. Elias and Shadow were long gone, swallowed by the wilderness, leaving no trace. He had the legal right, the piece of paper, but the wolf, the object of his consuming desire, was utterly beyond his reach. His victory was hollow, a paper crown on an empty throne. He had spent a fortune to reclaim something he had discarded for $1, only to find that it was the bond, not the beast, that held the true value. And that bond was something he could never possess. Years passed. Arthur Vance's empire continued to thrive, his financial success unwavering. He built new towers, acquired more companies, his name synonymous with power and wealth. Yet, the memory of the wolf, of the dollar, and of Elias's quiet dignity became a festering wound in his otherwise impenetrable psyche. He would occasionally catch glimpses of news stories about reclusive old men living in the wild, or photographs of wolves spotted near the city's edge, and a familiar pang of regret would pierce him. He understood now, with a clarity that stung like a lash, that he hadn't merely given away an animal. He had given away an opportunity for a genuine, unconditional connection, a glimpse into a world where value was measured not by currency, but by loyalty, spirit, and shared survival. He had thrown away something priceless for $1, dismissed it as worthless. And the bitter taste of that mistake would never truly leave him. He would never forgive himself for it. The wealth he accumulated felt increasingly cold, unable to fill the void left by that single profound misjudgment. He had all the world's treasures, but he lacked the one thing a beggar had found in a starving wolf: true companionship. Meanwhile, far from the city's clamor, in the heart of the whispering pines and rugged mountains, Elias and Shadow lived out their days in serene harmony. Their existence was simple, hard-won, dictated by the rhythms of nature. They shared the bounty of the forest, Elias foraging for berries and roots, Shadow occasionally bringing back small game. Their days were filled with quiet companionship, long walks through sun-dappled glades, and silent moments of shared peace under star-strewn skies. The old man, once a forgotten figure on the city streets, had found his true purpose, his truest companion, and a profound sense of belonging. Their bond, tested by hardship and pursuit, had only deepened, a testament to the enduring power of connection, forged not by ownership, but by mutual respect and unwavering loyalty. It proved that some gifts, once given freely and nurtured with care, become more valuable than any fortune, offering a richness of spirit that no amount of money could ever replicate. Arthur Vance's ambition had been forged in a crucible of perceived inadequacy, a childhood overshadowed by a demanding, emotionally distant father who measured success solely in tangible assets. He remembered a broken toy, a small carved wooden horse, which his father had simply replaced with a newer, more expensive version, dismissing his tears with a curt, "Don't mourn what can be bought again." This early lesson had solidified into a life philosophy. Everything had a price, and anything that couldn't be bought was either worthless or unattainable, and therefore best ignored. Emotions were liabilities, connections mere transactions. This cynical worldview had propelled him to unimaginable wealth, but also insulated him in a gilded cage of his own making, where genuine affection was a foreign currency. The wolf, initially, was just another acquisition, a fleeting attempt to possess something wild, something that hinted at a freedom he himself had never known. Its refusal to conform was not just an inconvenience, it was a personal affront to his carefully constructed reality. Elias, on the other hand, carried the echoes of a different past. He hadn't always been a figure on the streets. Once he had been a carpenter, his hands skilled with wood, his days filled with the scent of sawdust and the quiet satisfaction of creation. He had a small cabin on the outskirts of a rural town, a wife whose laughter was like wind chimes, and a garden that fed them. But a swift, cruel turn of fate, a logging accident that left him with a permanent limp, followed by the illness that took his wife, had stripped him of everything but his memories and his inherent connection to the earth. He never sought pity, nor did he dwell on what was lost, but the capacity for deep empathy and patience, honed by years of nurturing life and enduring loss, remained. He saw the wolf's suffering with the clarity of one who had known it himself, a silent understanding passing between two beings adrift in a world that often overlooked them. Shadow, in turn, was a creature of instinct, but not without memory. The harsh confinement, the unfamiliar smells, the loud, jarring noises of the city had left deep scars. It had learned to distrust, to anticipate pain, to brace for hunger. But Elias's quiet persistence, his gentle offerings of food, the absence of threat in his presence, slowly began to unravel those ingrained fears. The wolf's senses, once overwhelmed, began to sort the signals. It learned Elias's scent, a complex tapestry of wood smoke, damp earth, and human kindness, and associated it with safety, with sustenance. It learned the cadence of his footsteps, the low rumble of his voice, the subtle shifts in his posture that communicated calm or concern. One frigid evening, a group of boisterous, drunken youths, emboldened by alcohol, cornered Elias in a narrow alley, their intentions unclear but menacing. Before Elias could even register the full threat, Shadow, with a speed that belied its previous emaciation, materialized from the shadows, a low guttural snarl ripping from its throat, its teeth bared in a silent, terrifying warning. The youths, sobered instantly by the primal ferocity, scattered, leaving Elias shaken but unharmed. In that moment, the bond solidified, not just a shared need for survival, but an active, fierce protection. In a world where almost everything can be bought for money, true value remained beyond the reach of any currency. Arthur Vance regained the wolf on paper, but lost something far greater: genuine connection, trust, and friendship that Elias and Shadow found in simplicity and mutual understanding. This story reminds us that the most precious gifts cannot be sold or bought. They are born where patience, respect, and belief in another prevail.